I'm going to call the meeting to order, Council, so we can get started on the delegations, the remaining delegations that we have. Again, just to go through that, Jacqueline House has called in to say she would not be present this evening. We've just dealt with Nanta Garlow, so she will not be presenting. So that will lead us into our ethics people, Lauren Jones, Lauren, Inky, Don, and Tara. And those should be quite quick in terms of ethics, so I don't plan to take too much time on each of those. Brooke?
Sorry, being that Nanta, she is with Two Row Times.
Yeah.
She's usually on the meetings anyway, so.
Yeah, she would still be considered media.
Okay. So should I still let her in when I let everyone else in?
I think if we could maybe just give her a note
But
first.
give her a note? Okay, yeah,
sounds
good.
So she doesn't expect to be presented.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Brooke. Okay, Council, I'm going to call the meeting to order. If I can, I'll look to identify any media on the line at this point. And again, we'll probably, I think I heard Donna Durick was in the waiting room. Okay, perfect. I see people joining in now. I'm going to next go to the adoption of the agenda, looking to a mover in seconder.
I'll move it, Sherlyn.
Moved by Sherry Lynn. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Helen.
Yeah, I'll do that, but I have a question. I'm
Second
getting some calls from people to say, how come it's not on Facebook?
That's what we just discussed. So our comms person is not joined in yet.
Oh, okay.
So once they
that will be on Facebook?
Yes, and it is recorded anyway. So what we'll do if they don't join in, it won't be live. However, we'll still post the recording.
Okay.
Okay, is there any further questions or comments in relation to the agenda? Okay, seeing or hearing none, then all in favor? Any opposed? Seeing or hearing none, motion is carried. Okay, so we do have a number of delegations this evening. I'm going to first begin with Lauren Jones. I believe Lauren's on the line, our wildlife management assistant out of our lands and resource. These are all ethic recommendations from our ethics committee. So what I'm going to do, because we do have a number of them and I don't want to take up too much time, I'm going to ask our presenters if you could please limit yourself to at least a 2 to 3 minute high level overview of your application, and then we'll go from there from discussion, questions, comments, and so forth. So our first one is Lauren Jones. So good evening, Lauren, and welcome to General Counsel.
Thank you. Everybody can hear me okay, I presume?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so the ethics application largely just revolved around an anonymous survey that was funded by the ECCC to determine Six Nations use of the areas of concern within Southern Ontario. So those were denoted as the Toronto waterfront, the Hamilton Harbor, and the Niagara River. From ECCC's perspective, that information would be used to determine fish consumption limits that they should be suggesting to people. And then it was beneficial to Six Nations, of course, because it helps to actually determine what Six Nations community members, where they're fishing, what they're doing. I also included within this anonymous survey to include information about the Grand River as well, to try and assess and compare current attitudes towards the Grand River versus previous surveys that we have in our possession at the Wildlife Office. So all that information was given out, the survey itself was given out at the Community Awareness Week through Lands and Resources. Everything was done completely anonymously, and participants received a $5 gift card for Yawago. And that's pretty much the gist of it.
Thank you, Nyala, for that. Lauren, I'm going to open the floor up for any questions, comments. As you'll see, the recommendation on the agenda from Lauren. I see Michelle has her hand raised.
I'll move it.
Okay, Nyala, for that. Michelle, it's moved by Michelle. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Audrey. Are there any further questions or comments? Carrie?
No, after this is approved, I just have a question for Lauren
Okay.
before
All right,
she
thanks
leaves.
for that. Alrighty, thanks, Carrie. Okay, seeing or hearing no further questions or comments, I'm going to go to the vote. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing or hearing none, motion is carried. I'll look to second reading after we hear from all of the ethics applications. So I'll go back to Carrie. I believe Lauren, I think this is on a separate matter. Carrie has a question.
Yeah, Lauren, did you get the email from Paul Robertson?
I did, yeah. I just got it at the kind of end of day today though, so I'll be working on that contract hopefully tomorrow, and I'll send it to you as soon as I'm done.
Yeah, because he said spraying will likely start the week of May 29th, which is next Monday.
Yeah, it's quite
So
soon.
we'll have to let the community know. And
Yeah.
That's all right. And the spraying won't be quite as much as the last one, because all they could get was BT for about 2/3 of the total spraying that they wanted to do.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That was everything. Just so the community would, I don't even think they're on Facebook.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no
Yeah.
worries. It's on top of my list tomorrow.
all right, okay, that's fine. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Lauren. And again, this is recorded and will be further shared through our Facebook. Greg?
Yeah, hi, Lauren. Yeah, I went through your presentation that you put in our Dropbox. I just have one question. Are you do you investigate the new species that have been, or I guess it'd be foreign species that have been introduced to the Grand River?
It's not really a focus of this particular survey. We do, however, ask what species in general people are harvesting and consuming. And there is like a little section within the survey itself that if we don't have an example that's listed, that you can add your own. I wouldn't necessarily expect a lot of invasives to be consumed, but if that's a concern, that's great to know. I can definitely make it a focus in future surveys and future activities.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Nyawa, for that, Greg and Lauren. Are there any further final questions for Lauren? Okay, seeing or hearing, I do want to say Nyawa and thank you, Lauren, for joining us this evening, and also to Carrie's point, do look forward to moving next steps on the Gypsy matter.
Thank you.
Okay, Gypsy Moth, rather. Our next presenter is, and want to welcome her, and I hope I'm pronouncing this properly. I'm not sure if I see her on the screen. Is Anka Folier? Yes. Okay.
Yes, my name is Anke Völler-Carroll, and thank you so much for the opportunity for me to speak to you tonight. This is my first time in this forum, and I'm a tourism professor at Humber College. I've been teaching sustainable tourism for over a decade, and I would like to co-create a course for any post-secondary students with you that is led by Indigenous educators on Indigenous tourism. And I have worked many years in the field, and I've connected international visitors with Indigenous tourism businesses here in Canada, and also in my role as educator, I have done the same with my students in countries like Mexico, Panama, and Costa Rica and Nicaragua. And I have always watched this experience unfold, and my mind always went to the Indigenous service provider and wondering what goes through their mind. What are their feelings about this experience? What are their feelings about their encounters with the non-Indigenous visitors for the most part? And so I would like to create this course to also really amplify the voices of Indigenous tourism businesses. Right now, we're seeing a steep increase in demand from overseas as well as domestic tourism, and we also, conversely, also have a lot of investments in Indigenous tourism agencies, and most importantly, of course, Six Nations. I looked at the mission statement for Six Nations, and part of it reads that it is to educate visitors on the Haudenosaunee culture, and I believe that by co-creating this course, we would be addressing a big gap that is happening in, or that is existing in, post-secondary education at the moment. And so my ask for you tonight is to ask for your permission to speak to a few tourism providers at Six Nations to seek their expertise. And to make sure that their voices flow right into that course so that it is suitable for your purposes. And I'm on this journey because I do see, as a mother, as a curriculum developer, as a tourism professional, because I see that that there is a lot of opportunities to really fill that gap in a very meaningful manner. And I started this journey by asking Jason Seawright, who is the Vice President of Indigenous Education and Engagement, and Elijah Williams from Humber for their blessing. I asked Elder Henry at Waterloo. I've also looked and visited Six Nations at a number of occasions for lunch and learns through the Indigenous Knowledge Center, events, tourism events that are out there. And I'm hoping that, I sincerely hope that it is of value to you, what I have to offer. And thank you once again very much for the opportunity to address you. I've sent a more detailed slide deck to Brooke, and of course, all the details are also on my application. So thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.
Hey, Nyawa, so much. Thank you. Do appreciate how quick everything is rolling in terms of the presentation, so do appreciate it. I'm going to open the floor up for any further questions or comments. Again, I think this is a really important one, as we see there over the years. I have not seen as much attention needed in the tourism sector, especially within Indigenous communities, and so I think this is something is definitely of interest. In fact, we've even done a little bit of reconfiguring our own tourism and what we want to see as well. So do appreciate your presentation. I see Darren has his hand raised.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you very much. I also just want to build on the comments from the chief, just in terms of we've made a bit of a shift. Tourism is under council now. It used to be under economic development. And I think a couple of things, just in terms of the recommendation, you spoke about a course that's not explicit in the recommendation. So maybe we can add that in terms of the course development, with the target being not just Indigenous operators, but other operators that are partners with Indigenous operators, I think would be a good add. And I also think the results of your research, obviously, I think that's part of our ethics process, is to share that with Six Nations, just in terms of the psychological profiling for the marketing perspective. I think would be very helpful. So I just wanted to make those points, Chief. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Darren, Audrey.
Welcome. I just wanted to know that once you're finished all of this and you find out how we are doing our tourism, will you be able to, I guess, tell us which ones are being successful in gathering tourists to us so that we can continue to do what we're doing well and maybe tweak the stuff that we're not doing so well at? Yeah.
Yes, so all the results of my research will be shared, and in any form, timing that you would appreciate. Yes, I will definitely give that feedback back to you. The first, what I would like to do with this particular ask is to get a sentiment from your tourism businesses, what supports they might also need to really improve, or to have that experience as wholesome as as possible, and to see that make recommendations of how to educate future tourism students, or also anyone who wants to learn how to best present and invite people, to make sure that they also come with an open mind, and that experience is very wholesome, especially for the community.
Thank you.
Answer your question?
Okay, Nyawa, for that as well. Looking to any further questions or comments? And if not, looking to a mover and seconder on Inca's recommendation, or ethics recommendation. Moved by Audrey, seconded by Greg. And again, any further questions or comments? Okay, seeing or hearing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Seeing or hearing none, motion is carried. Well, thank you so much, Nyawa, Inca, for joining us this evening. And we'll look to, again, further next steps through the office.
Thank you so much.
Nyawa, have a great evening.
Thank you.
Okay, our next delegation we have is Dawn Martin Hill on her approval for phase 2 of the co-creation. I'll look to Dawn to pass the floor over for just a quick high-level overview, and then look to any questions or comments. So welcome. Good evening, Dawn.
Hi. Is there any way I can share my screen?
Yes, you should have the ability on the green button.
Okay. Got it. So I've just asked Hillary to send over the PDF file. So what this is I asked her to put a binder together to give to council of all the publications that our team has done in the last 4 years. And it came out to 370 pages, which actually shocked me a little bit. But we've been really productive, both in scholarly, peer-reviewed scientific journal publications, as well as in community updates and reports. So our latest community update and report is we have overall developed the template with Chris Martin as a lead mapper and Rudo Kemper from Digital Democracies to develop our map of 6 nations. We have been uploading water quality data. We've uploaded our findings. Mark Servos just finished his watershed study, which I'll touch on, but all of the data that we're collecting will be accessible in this open access platform of TerraStory mapping. We've also uploaded stories such as The Peacemaker. We've had Norma General and Jock and a few others interviewing them. And as they're telling the story about the Peacemaker's journey around the Great Lakes, we are documenting the sites that he stopped on to match the stories, just to give the public a sense of how long our people have been in this territory, because I know that's up for debate. So we're just also documenting through my PhD student, Emily Anson, who's also the archaeology officer for this region in Hamilton. She's documenting all of the archaeological sites that have Haudenosaunee, and our use of water and our villages along the water. So the mapping is really what the tool that we said we would create, so that people can learn about not only the water quality, but how important water was, what kind of fishes we had, what we lived on, our subsistence. And one of the projects we did with Nick Rio from Dartmouth was we looked at how to improve our source water, even with the treatment plant, is the Grand River. So the community folks said they wanted to see some of the dams come down that are no longer in use. We looked at how would we do that, and what we found was there's over 100 dams, which is insane amount of dams for any river system as small as the Grand River. So we started looking at, well, which dams could we begin to tried to decommission. And some of the most problematic would be the one in Maitland. So I've had the engineers look at it. It's really frustrating because the sensor data we collected from the US fisheries, where they monitor the fish, you can literally see the fish every year try to swim to us, and a lot of them die along this dam in Port Maitland. And so now what do? They have recreational guys fishing there because like the fish are going to be there trying to come to us. So we're just trying to put together the holistic impact of our waters on our culture, on our health, on our economy, on our well-being. And so we're almost done. The end of this project, Oneganos, as you know it, is going to be this August. So we have put in a number of grants with large senior researchers, and we didn't get 3 of them. I put in 2 more with some UN folks and UNESCO folks. Hopefully those come through. So one of the things I'll be asking is, I know that Six Nations had agreed to contribute funds to Oneganos. We have not collected on those funds in a couple of years. And we're hoping that some of those funds could be forthcoming. The other thing that our project does is we work with the STEAM Academy. We work with Gaiwaneo, and now we're trying to expand to the Haldeman area. But right now we have been giving out certificates of completion for students who work on collecting data for our mapping for our water quality. Our engineers and our biologists train them. They've been out in the water with them. Then they do a project for us. We upload that information to our mapping sites, and they get a certificate. And we're trying to get 3 certificates to the students, and that 3 certificates will lead to 1 university credit. So we're working on that. We're still going after Blue Triton. It is against the law what they're doing. They have taken and continue to extract more than 3.6 million liters since Fort Power. If we lose our aquifer, you're going to see what's happening in Alberta happen to our Carolinian forest. If we continue to let them take our aquifer, it's going to deplete all of the maple trees. We won't be able to collect maple because you're drying out the veins of our earth. You're drying her out. And what will happen is the land will sink because there's no more mass. And then we will be without clean water, as we already are, because we're not maximizing our own use of the aquifer. So we're trying to get community awareness about how important it is to save our aquifer. So this was us looking at the dams on the Grand River. The virtual reality's almost done. I have, as everything else, I'm running out of cash. But we've been getting a lot of rave reviews for the Sky World piece that's complete. It is an exhibit at Mohawk College in their digital lab. And apparently it's one of the more popular exhibits that they have. There's a continuing ask to see it because they have some really cool screens that are like, as big as the room. On our mental health advocacy, we're still in talks to develop the app. We've done all the data research on what youth would want, what they need. We've published those in scientific journals, and now it's just getting funding to actually develop the app or what I'm working with an agency to help us do that. We do have our sensors. So Emil is working on, it's about $1,000 to use the sensor, and the goal is to get it even cheaper so that people can afford it. COVID really, really hurt the sensors because they couldn't come in the community. They lost the PhD students to do the legwork. Because of COVID, some of them had to return home, et cetera. So we're putting in grants to continue to try to get our sensors along the Grand River. All of our health data is in now. The birthing center with my PhD student from anthropology did a survey with 50 moms and grandmothers, a couple of grandmothers, to look at what is the impact on new mothers and water insecurity. We also did our HY survey with Six Nations Health Services, and you can see the data here. And the reason why the HYs is important, it may not seem important, but we want to standardize the health data that's happening at Six Nations. As we reviewed all of the data, we found there was no rhyme or reason to the data. If I wanted to look at what are the long-term health income of our community, and can we correlate any of those to the environment, we can't do that because the data has been driven by Indian Affairs or Health Canada, and it makes no sense. So standardizing data is what every First Nation's trying to do, so we can get a handle on evaluating whether programs and services are actually working. We use the HYs, which is a United Nations, UNESCO metric of water insecurity impact on health. That study, that particular metric has never been used in Canada or the United States, or what they would call in a first world country. They've only used it in India, Africa, Malaysia, etc. We incorporated the HY scale into our health survey so that we could get a standardization, but also so we could compare how is Six Nations compared to, let's say, Kenya or a village in India. And it's actually, from what we're just now looking at, not that different. What we do have is high levels of anxiety and mental health stressors, particularly on young moms. So providing services, particularly to what we call vulnerable populations, to help them access clean water would be a recommendation that we're putting forward, because it's causing them a great deal of distress, and it's making them sick. They're literally not drinking water, they're dehydrating because they run out of water as nursing moms, or they're drinking sugared drinks because they don't have enough water. So hopefully the data and it goes into health, and then we can create some policies that will definitely help alleviate some of the economic and mental health burdens that water insecurity is having on particularly this targeted community of new moms and young people. We've also won awards. 3 of the awards we have is from a tier 1 university. Canada doesn't even have a tier 1 research university. U of T is about the closest to being one. So to get one from a tier 1 is like a big deal in the academic world or science world. So we did receive that. The podcast, 30 episodes. We won the David Suzuki People's Choice Award, and we won an award to publish a book through Princeton University in a global scale. Every academic dreams of having Princeton publish their work, because that puts you on your work on a very high level of scholarly scientific efficacy. It means you're good, because they don't publish people who aren't in this environment, and they've given us a grant. So we've been working on that. We have funded all of these undergraduate students, many of them from Six Nations, many from the local areas and communities. All of the funding that we get, most of it has to fund students. That's just how research grants work. PhDs and MAs are about 25, which is pretty stellar for any research project to have so many successful PhDs and so on. And then we have our community partners, which we listed. We've had many people from the community help Onegino's produce material for Onegino. So we really have over 200 contacts and stakeholders that we've worked with on some aspect. We are finishing the modeling. We're just publishing the new one. And because it's not out, I didn't put it in the binder. But it's just, again, trying to give Six Nations Council some recommendations for how to prepare, particularly in the health field, which will be really important because of the coming climate stressors that we'll be facing. And if we lose our aquifer, it could be tenfold from what we're predicting here. We're not predicting the loss of our aquifer in these particular models. We're assuming that that's somewhat intact. And then our publications. So we've published in books, global books, United Nations supported books, and we've also published in a number of scientific journals. So we've done really good, and including Vogue reached out to Makasha through the Takala series, and they're publishing not only the articles that they did, but they're also publishing the book. And then also the work was picked up by China. So we really we're surprised at how successful it is. The Mackenzie Creek watershed, led by Mark Servos, he worked closely with Lauren, is finished. So doing the eDNA studies, they actually were stunned to find out 39 different fish species were found in our watershed. And then obviously looking at some of the data on how healthy those fish are is the next phase of that. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. But we are currently trying to finish up our work and then look at what our next steps are to keep going. COVID did adversely affect our research, like it did many things. The fact that we survived and continued to pivot and find ways to work around, but some things are really needed, like the sensors. Like we would really like to see those in operation and uploaded to our digital map. I think that's it. The Royal Society of the UK Embassy got a hold of me the other day and said, we would like to come and speak with you about Onigenos and to see your virtual reality, because we're looking into this. This Royal Society is the oldest scientific academy in the world. They funded Darwin. It tells you how old they are. And they also funded Stephen Hawking. So the fact that they're coming to talk to us is kind of, well, universities are losing their minds. So these are all good supports for us to try to get more funding when we can say these folks are awarding us or giving us. It's how it works in the research world. And I'm probably leaving out 1,000 things, but we don't have all night.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Nyama, so much, Don. There's lots going on, and in fact, I know the latest, or rather, the most recent one that I remember is the VR. It's a really cool experience. I think I was doing some opening remarks at your last event at the Gathering Place.
Yeah,
it's really, really important work, and do appreciate all of what you have going on, and especially the interconnecting. Where is it that it could fit to help? The bigger picture, I think, is also really super important. Greg?
Congratulations, Don, on all your awards. It's not very nice to see. I just had a question about you were emphasizing dams, and they seem to be a negative effect on the Grand. And I was thinking that from Dundalk to Port Maitland, I think the river drops about 1,200 feet now, and that's probably why there's so many dams. But the question I had is, if you eliminated those dams, would there be any positive or negative ecological or health benefit if those dams were not there?
So when we talked to the knowledge holders in the community and said, there's a number of ways we can clean the Grand River, which happens to be the source water for the water treatment plant. They all suggested that the river can clean itself. It can restore itself if we remove the dam and limit the amount of waste going into the river. So we looked at the dams, and Mark Servos is probably one of the most leading experts in this area on the Grand River. He's been studying the Grand River for 30 years. I certainly haven't. He identified, I said, can you please help me identify which dams could come down without the greatest ecological impact. Right now, if we took that, so the dam in Caledonia is completely useless. It's not there. It's not controlling. These are what you call decommissioned dams. They serve zero purpose other than now people like to stand on them and fish, and they'll fight us. Like tourism is one thing that will take you on if they think they're going to lose revenue by guys not being able to stand out there and fish, which is really unfair because those fish are literally stuck along the dams. those won't do any damage to water, other than what they will do is they would lower the river along Six Nations, because they dug out the along Six Nations is the deepest part of the Grand River, because it's essentially a holding tank for waste. 25 wastewater treatments upstream from us. And I have drone footage that shows even coming in from Guelph, just around Brantford there, after that dam, you can see the waste coming towards us. That waste has been settling for over 100 years since they built the dam. If we were to take one dam down, it might destroy things downstream that are healthier. So the water's healthy around Cayuga and the water's healthy upstream from us. Where it becomes putrid is Brantford to Six Nations. Those are the dirtiest areas of the Grand River. So we thought, well, why don't we look at decommissioning the one dam by Caledonia? It serves no purpose. And biologists and chemical engineers, because we also had plants in Elmira that have been making things like carcinogens, things that cause cancer. So the Agent Orange for the Vietnam War, they were producing the majority of that, and that cannot be necessarily cleaned out. It can just simply disperse to make it less lethal if we were to take the dam down. So they suggested if we take the Caledonia Dam down, we would need to take it down little by little, not like just wipe it out, which is what, of course, older people in the community would like to see. They said, no, you would need to do it very slowly because it would destroy the ecosystem downstream of the Grand River. If we take down the Port Maitland Dam, decommission that one, that would be the best. I mean, it's literally like this high that the fish can't come up this way. It's so small, but yet it's just enough to keep the fish from migrating towards us, which is our subsistence. That is our cultural right to be able to fish. So that's the one we kind of identified as the least harmful to the ecosystem. But also, if we take it down, in other words, they're not going to get 100 years of toxicity and contaminants coming down. But if we did the Caledonia Dam, it would have to be very piecemeal, small increments, so that it's not all at once that it would wipe out the ecosystem downstream. And then the one in Brantford, obviously, is another dam. Like, what you realize is these dams are serving absolutely zero purpose. They're not for flooding. They're not keeping, they're all pretty much decommissioned. There's a few that are actually working as flooding supports. Other than that, they're not serving purposes. And yet there's 100 of them, which if you study any river, that's an insane amount of dams, which is why the water is so dirty.
Follow up, Chief? Don, it makes a good fuel for our walk the Haldeman Tract. Just some information for the municipalities to understand that, you know, there is a negative impact with these dams, and it does affect our health. You know, and I think that if they realize that these dams are absolutely useless, we may gain allies, you know, as we walk the track. So we'll see. Thank you.
Yep. There.
Okay, thanks, Nyama, for that, Greg. This is all, you know, again, it's all super important. It's a matter of, I think, and Don, I know just with your work and, you know, ourselves doing work at the Indigenous Education Council, it's how do we connect everybody so that we're all now working towards that common goal, because there's so much. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like we're always looking for funding, and we know money is always an issue. But I think if we can get like on your point, your last PowerPoint, the partners that you have had, and to all be able to work on that same pathway, I think that's really the trick in order to get to, I think, our next step. Sorry, Don, I'm not sure if you had anything to add.
No, I mean, I am talking with SNP and hoping that at some point somewhere in the community we can begin pulling all of the important environmental work together, and you know, we've applied for $27 million. We've applied for 1 million. The bottom line is that competition in NSHRC is insanely tough. The best researcher that I've ever met that has 300 publications, leading expert in Canada, didn't get the NSHRC. I thought maybe it was me. So he was going to lead it, and he has a better portfolio than me. He didn't get it. And that's when I just said, we shouldn't have to struggle. It should come from the government. I shouldn't have to write 70-page research applications only to find out we're not getting it again. And there has to be funding in the community. I mean, at the end of the day, Six Nations needs to step up and put some money towards this work. We have done probably $12 million if we were consultants, easily, if you were paying me $100 an hour like other consultants get, where you've got 120 of us working for free, bringing the money in to the community, hiring locals. You know, there's got to be some reciprocity. And the agreement was in kind, they would support with $80,000. Now, I know that was the last administration, but that doesn't matter in a research project, right? You're just expecting that you're going to have these X amount of dollars to continue to hire local people. Like, we're in the middle of collecting fish. Our biologist did the whole study in Northern Ontario on all the different contaminants in fish and what's safe to eat, what's not safe to eat. We need that data. That's just health data that everybody should know. You should only eat this amount of fish because it's got mercury in it, and you can't get rid of that. So we need, you know, this is something that Six Nations should be doing, but we're doing it for Six Nations in the hopes that we galvanize and encourage more work in this area. So I think it was only $80,000 in the scheme of things isn't a ton. I think that's what the cheese cost, right? At Bread and Cheese. We're not asking for a ton, but we're saying we can do a lot with a little bit. So I just suggest that, you know, we did agree in these grants to do this work, and there would be an in-kind contribution. We didn't want to bother people during COVID. We didn't know how things would land. But now that we're near there, I think it's something that should be revisited and assessed if we continue to do this work. And in the meantime, we'll always try to do the grants. And certainly if we set up with SNP, we'd be happy to help them develop any kind of continuing capacity building with this team. I think the real success is that I've created a really solid group of people who are willing to help, who aren't asking for money, like consultants do, and they're invested in the community. They've built relationships here. I think that's really the overall. Now we need Six Nations to kind of step in and continue the work, because there's so much more to be done.
Now for that, Don, and totally agree. And so we can definitely work to see what we can contribute at this point in time. I think it's a really important work, like you say. Audrey?
Yeah, I commend you, Don, and all the people that worked with us, and for your volunteerism and the results that you're getting. So it will help our health out. It will help our whole reserve out, especially when we start improving our policies and making some policies for fish that contain mercury, and advise our community that those fish should not be eaten. And it also will give us an opportunity to work with our municipalities up and down the Grand River to gain some allies there to encourage them to lessen the waste that they put in the Grand River. And like, I've never seen it look so brown in my life, and that to me is scary. When you in the survey, when you ask how many fish you eat out of the Grand River, 0.
Mm-hmm.
I'm too afraid to eat the fish in the Grand River, although somebody said it's good water. I just
They are eating. They are eating, and actually down here on Fifth Line during COVID, I saw at least 5 to 10 cars down there. They were fishing, and that's probably, like, if we did the mapping, that's one of the worst places to get it, because it has like a bow in it. So that means all the sludge and waste or whatever gets in there kind of settles in these little enclaves. That's like the most contaminated spot. So getting the map out into the public, into the schools, educating people, the virtual reality, saying, here's some good places to fish. This maybe don't fish here. Like, it's not the best, it's got a lot of sludge. So even just if we can start educating, which is why we created the virtual reality and the mapping, we can start steering people to maybe go to spots that we know would be healthier. But they are fishing, and I was quite shocked to see that many people down there daily fishing. I was like, wow, I didn't know anybody ate fish out of the Grand around here.
Yeah, my question, I guess, for you, what are you looking for here today from council?
Well, I think that we haven't had an office. We gave up our spot over at Public Works because of COVID. They needed it for emergency, and our people couldn't come here anyway. So we had to pivot our lab work and so on. So having even just an office to keep the work going and to store the work. So like, we'll probably have about 500 pages of data, that's got to be taken care of and hopefully built on. And then the funding to continue keeping the students that are working for us, they're PhD students or masters, but they know what they're doing. They have different streams. They don't need a ton of money, but having a little bit to carry them over, because the project funding runs out September, it wraps up. So if we were to get the in kind, it could keep us running for another year until we find some more funding.
Well, I really support what you're doing, and I'll make a motion to that. But I think we need Darren in the finance department and you to get together to give us a ballpark figure of what it is you're looking for. And again, Darren James is in charge of all the buildings, and office space is prime right now. So I wish you luck getting some office space.
Yeah, so and I know Dawn, we've had multiple conversations as well, and in fact, she's in the queue of space. As we all know, everyone's to Audrey's point is fighting for space.
I know. It's
But,
the same at Mac.
Yes, yeah. So we got to just come up with that bigger game plan to how we're going to do that. Sorry, I just want to confirm, Audrey, are you prepared to move on the recommendation in relation to their Dawn's ethics application? So it's on the agenda right now as phase 2. Is that correct, right, Dawn?
Yeah, it's phase 2, and it's just finishing up the testing of the turtles that people run over on the road, and but it's got a high level of ethics approval. Most of the research is done, but there's a few, like testing the fish wasn't done as much as we needed. So we have every year you have to renew it and review it. So we submitted it. I didn't even know it was not that we didn't have an MOU for this section. I thought we were covered.
Right. Okay, thanks, Dawn. So I just want to confirm, Audrey, you're still prepared to move on that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you for that. Is there a seconder before I go to further questions or comments? Seconded by Sherry Lynn with a question or comment.
Yeah, I was just going to move it, and I agree that it's time for sure to help you out and to really see what's going on, because this has been going on for a long time, and we need to really work together with our environment and beef up our environmental department for sure. So again, I thank you for all the work that you're doing along with the Grand. And I wanted just to say with the Grand is because that was this, I'm going to think probably about 20 years ago, the health concerns. My kids went swimming, they went water skiing or something, and they got impetigo. Yeah. And they had two little scratches on their legs, and they got impetigo. So that was 20 years ago. So I can't imagine what that water is today if they got impetigo 20 years ago from that water. So again, we need to keep it up, but also to support all the work that you're doing. Thanks.
Thank you.
Agreed, Neil, for that. Sherry Lynn, Michelle.
So thanks, Donna, and I support your research. I guess for me is we all do research. We all hope that we're changing, mindsets, but what is it that's going to change? Because I think, it is getting worse and we know what we need to do, but how do we change communities' mindset, right? It's a huge shift. And 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we knew what was happening and it's still happening. So to me, that's what I would like to really hone in on. But yeah, I support the research because we always need to know current trends. So thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I mean, the whole point of the mapping is we could code it like red so people know don't go here. Like the algae is going to get much worse. I don't know if you read the climate change modeling that we did. That's not just here at the Grand River, it's Turkey Point, it's all the waters. So we're trying to give citizens the tools so they can make good decisions about, where to take their kids swimming, where to fish, where to avoid certain areas. They don't have that right now. So the goal is to get this into the schools, and that's what I need Six Nations Council support with is, when we built these tools, then the second phase is getting them into people's hands and hearts, and the training of the kids, bringing them to MAC, like we had them collecting bugs. We had waders, so they're completely covered with our scientists, and learning how that by collecting amphibians, they can test the water quality. So we're doing our part to test. We probably trained 60, 70 kids. And I can tell you, the youth of Six Nations, the really young kids, they are really interested in water, really interested in climate change. So part of the VR that we didn't want to do is include the climate change data, because it would cause a lot of anxiety, according to our mental health team. So we're creating a gaming component so that they can make better decisions to have better outcomes for the future. And the goal is to get that into all the schools, not just the Native kids. The non-Native kids is what these elders wanted them to learn, how important their actions are, and they can get after their own communities to not put so much contaminants into the Grand River. And we want to create Nestle free zones so that people understand this is a human rights violation, what they're doing right now to us without our consent, and water taking, what they did in California, what they did in Detroit. Like, they have a horrible human rights record. So I think we've done a pretty good job raising awareness. And I think that's what I'll need Six Nations help with, is getting the educational pieces into those schools.
Thanks, Neil, for that. Don, I see Audrey has her hand raised.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. I agree with the education part, and I'll help you out in any way that I can.
Yay.
One question is, what happened to all of our frogs? A decade ago, you saw hundreds of frogs on the road. You had to stop, let them all hop across. Now, I don't see any frogs jumping across the road. So there's something has happened to them. So that's one of the questions. And I guess it's just so important that we educate everybody about this. So we're going to have to really sit together and put our heads together and plan and organize. This affects so much. The other question I had, are you working also with our environment committee for Six Nations?
Well, I report to them, but I don't have like a dialogue or running dialogue with them. Some of our team members have been working, with different folks, either at the Fish and Wildlife or on the environment. But in terms of being plugged in and knowing what's going on, I don't.
Okay, well, Nathan is our council lead for that, and Rod Whitlow is the other person who's heavily engaged in it. So what happened to our frogs?
We're going to continue to lose biodiversity. That's part of climate change. So we're not the only people. And what we're doing is we're destroying their habitat. So if you take next door to me, you couldn't sleep at night because the frogs were so loud. they went and they messed around with it. They put gravel into there, and those should be protected sites. So again, it's getting information to the community to say, this is an important habitat for a species. We need to not make it a parking lot or remove the water because it's affecting. So again, it's education and getting protected sites. The same with turtles. We're trying to, we know where they're nesting. Those need to be protected. And right now, I think we all know there are no environmental ways, laws, if you will. It's like kind of like the Wild West here. You can pretty much build anything anywhere you want without consideration. Oh, maybe that's not a good place to put that tailing pond because it's right over our aquifer. You know, so again, it's just education and getting the community together and trying to get them to see, maybe put your tailing pond over there. It's not as harmful to the wildlife. So we will likely continue to lose species. Canada is warming at a rate 3 times more than the rest of the world. Northern Alberta is largely the reason, the tar sands. Now you see, we knew the boreal forest was going to burn. I tried to get that information to the First Nations in those areas. It's going to continue because they fracked and they drained their aquifers. So then everything dries out. It becomes very easy to be fire hazards. So the Carolinian will be in the same boat as what's happening in Northern, and we will be dealing with fires if we do not stop the corporate water extraction businesses from removing our aquifer. It's not even just saving our water, it's saving our ecosystem. So the frogs will move to places that have oxygenated water. And right now there's not a lot of places around this area that have enough oxygen to support a lot of wild aquatic life. So we're doing that aquatic assessment with our biologist. We should have that report by the end of August.
That's wonderful. That was a very clear explanation for me. I have lots of frogs in my pond though.
Oh no, I don't have any anymore. Just
You can borrow some of mine if you want. Yeah.
Thanks, Neil, for that, Audrey. Are there any further questions or comments for Don? I know there's some obviously good suggestions and comments made on this discussion as well. I know Don connecting with the task force, the Environment Task Force. I know Nathan's had the lead on that. They've been doing some really good work as well. It's inundated with work, as you can imagine, and as we could see on your presentation as well. So I think it's all about obviously the collaboration and all kind of heading towards that same common goal. And whatever assistance, I think that in terms of the connection of the schools, we can definitely assist on that and in the now, getting into the schools and have those discussions with Travis Anderson and so forth. But in the meantime, we're always looking for the space to get, for environment, building out that, but always ultimately looking for the funds too. So that's something that's going to have to continue more conversations and discussions.
Yeah, I mean, we know it's a tough one here, but if any little cubicle becomes available, that would be amazing.
Definitely hear you. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I think we've had in-depth conversation and discussion. I'm going to go to the vote. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing or hearing none, motion is carried. We're going to look to do second reading on all the previous presenters after that. So I'll wait on second reading until we hear from Tara. So just want to say nyawa, Don, for joining us this evening, and I hope you have a really good evening.
Take care. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Don. Bye-bye. Okay, Council, our next guest, again, this is the final presentation under our delegation portion. And this is Tara Brookfield, Associate Professor from Wilfrid Laurier. I want to say, Sego, good evening, Tara, and welcome to our General Council. Again, if we can give it as brief of a high-level overview as we can, and then we'll look to any further questions and comments at that point in time. So I'll pass the floor over to yourself, Tara, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Chief Hill. It's an honor to be here today, and I look forward to sharing just a very brief overview of the project. I'm a historian who specializes in the history of children and youth in Canada in the 20th century, And I'm proposing to expand the current research project that I have, which is looking at the history of polio in Brantford and Brant County to include a Six Nations perspective. This project is collecting oral histories and archival evidence to try and understand what it was like to live between the 1920s and 1970s, which was a period which had local outbreaks of polio. Polio, if you don't know, is an infectious disease, and in its most severe form can cause partial or full paralysis. Until the vaccine was developed in 1955, the first vaccine, there were outbreaks almost every polio season, which ran from August to October. To date, I have collected 14 oral history interviews from people who were born or moved to or immigrated to Brantford or Brant County. And from their stories, we've learned about what it was like for both people who contracted polio in their childhood, and children and adolescents were most at risk from polio, as well as those who just lived under the fear of polio, fear coming from the media or from their parents or from their schools. We'd like to expand the study to Six Nations to consider that perspective, because I think it's important to understand what is the diversity experiences, which regional factors, cultural, economic, might have changed the experience, added risk or lessened risk for people contracting polio, or what would have provided the best resources if they had polio to get the best care and treatment. One of the other things we're studying is children who lived in congregate settings. So we've already done research with the Brant School of the Blind. And so we would like to have a comparative process with records from the Mohawk Institute as well, to see children living at home versus children who were raised in these congregate settings, which had so much risk for their health due to crowded conditions, as well as neglect and abuse. So what I'm here today is on behalf of myself and my two co-researchers who are former students from Laurier Brantford. One is a graduate of Indigenous Studies in Youth and Children's Study, Dolores Mays, and the other is a history graduate. And we'd like to have 3 to 5 interviews with community members who could talk about their experiences from the 1930s to the 1970s. You know, what do they remember from this period about polio? Was it something that was of concern to their families and themselves? If they had polio, what was that experience like? Another component of this study is, because we began it in the summer of 2020, we added on questions about what was it like to grow up as the generation most at risk from polio, and now as older adults who are most at risk from COVID. So we're also collecting data about comparing polio and COVID amongst our interview participants. Since working with the Research Ethics Committee, I've been connected to the Six Nations Health Services, and they asked if I would collaborate with them on one of their studies about vaccine hesitancy and confidence in relation to COVID. Could I provide some historic context from residents of Six Nations about, you know, what was their experience, for example, getting a polio vaccine or refusing a polio vaccine, for example, and how did they compare it to the landscape since 2021 when COVID vaccines were made available? And so I will provide a summary of my findings to the researchers, the 2 epidemiologists who are studying vaccine confidence, as well as provide any historic context to polio or other infectious diseases of the past within non-Indigenous and Indigenous communities. I'll just leave it there for now. I'm welcome to have any questions about the research study, the research questions, or procedures for advertising the study.
Okay, Niala, for that, Tara, for your presentation. I'm going to look to open the floor up to any questions or comments for Tara. Looking to any questions or comments, and if not, looking to a mover and seconder on the recommendation.
I'll move that, Chief.
Okay, now after that, Carrie, it's moved by Carrie. Is there a seconder?
I'll second, Sherry Lynn.
Seconded by Sherry Lynn. Any final questions or comments? Seeing or hearing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Seeing or hearing none, motion is carried. Okay, now for your time this evening, Tara, and for sharing your work, and look forward to again next steps.
Thank you very much.
Have a great evening. Okay, Council, before I move on to the next item, I'm going to call for second reading to be waived on all 4 previous motions. Looking to move seconder, moved by Michelle, seconded by Audrey. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing or hearing on motion is carried. Our next item is the adoption of the General Council minutes of April 25th.
I'll move.
It's moved by Michelle. Looking to a seconder. Seconded by Greg. Further questions or comments in relation to the minutes? Seeing or hearing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Seeing or hearing none, motion is carried. Excuse me, we're now going to go into recommendations from our records department. You'll see the recommendation 6.1 on
Chief.
our agendas. Sorry, Carrie?
Yeah, Heather is my niece, so should I declare a conflict?
Yes.
Okay.
Now for that, Carrie is declaring conflict on recommendation 6.1. I'll look to mover, seconder, further questions, comments. Again, this is a request of a release of the copy of the Six Nations groundwater study of fall of 2003. So this is following process when a request like this comes in from a community member.
I'll move it, Sherlyn.
Okay, it's moved by Sherry Lynn. Is there a seconder? I see Hazel has her hand up. Just want to confirm. Hazel, are you seconding?
Yes, and I also have a comment too.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Yeah, with regard to Kerry asking to be, if he's in conflict, I don't think he is. This whole thing of the information that's being requested, I don't know, is Heather an employee here? Is that why? He's
Well,
declaring a conflict or what?
Yeah, so within the current, and again, this is something that our council still really has never dealt with in terms of the whole conflict of interest itself. As we know, it's quite the contentious issue at this table. However, what's currently written is brother, sibling, niece, nephew, regardless of any business it's entitled to. And I know that it always goes back to, well, if there's no financial gain, then there's no conflict. However, how it's written right now is that it would still be deemed a conflict and up to that individual to declare it. So even for example, whenever I think the last issue was the internet towers in my family, whether it was just my uncle's property, I mean, regardless of which, I think it's up to each, and now at this point, the individual council, when they still feel as if they are in a conflict. So I felt Kerry felt he was.
Well, I don't agree with it all myself, but
I hear you, Hazel, but I think we got to set time aside specifically to deal with that whole policy in general.
yeah, okay.
Okay, thanks. Is there any further questions or comments? It's been moved and seconded, moved by Carrie and seconded by Hazel.
I didn't move it.
Oh, sorry, not moved by Carrie. Moved, so my apologies. You're in conflict by Carrie.
Yeah.
And sorry, just to confirm, it's moved by, I'll confirm with you. Sherry Lynn. Sorry, my apologies. Moved by Sherry Lynn, seconded by Hazel. Conflict declared by Carrie. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing or hearing on motion is carried. Okay, we're going to continue moving on our agenda here. The next one is recommendation from housing. I believe we do have Lillian on the line to speak to this issue. I'll pass the floor over to yourself, Lillian. Sorry, just want to make sure. Oh, there she is.
Sorry, guys. I'm just trying to connect. My Wi-Fi here is a little funky. I'm on vacation, so I just wanted to. Item was heard. I was liaising with Public Works Inc. membership just because there doesn't seem to be a clear policy on the naming of roads. And with the developments happening at Harold Road, we now have two intersecting streets coming off the main Harold Road. We weren't sure how to proceed with having those named. And at this point, it's starting to cause some issues with deliveries of items and materials and things like that, both for myself and Ellis's social 12plex that's being built there. So because there's no clear policy, it was decided amongst the three of us, myself, Lori at membership, and Mike at Public Works, to just briefing note through that Gail had indicated to Habitat that she had spoken to you about potentially naming after Karen. I don't know how that works, considering, you know, whether we're wanting to proceed with something like that, but I'm just leaving it up to council to decide what those names should be.
Yeah, so just to give you, and Nyawa for that, thanks Lillian. Just to give you a little background, I did receive a message from, the former manager in place, and that was her request. But again, did not have further communication on that point. So I'm glad that this is actually coming to, because you're right, there is no process on when it comes to naming roads, and I'm sure there's going to be many more. So we should be looking to develop that. So Pat, looking to open the floor for discussion on this matter. Helen.
If I remember correctly, we used to have contests, name the road contests. That's what we used to do. I don't know if there's, I don't recall ever having a policy on it, but that's how we've done it before. It's, you know, people can name whatever kind of road they want. I don't recall how Harold Road got there, though. I don't know who Harold is, but Lawrence Jonathan won, somebody won a contest for that.
That's
We
actually
haven't named that many roads, but I mean, so yeah, that's what we used to do.
I think that's a creative way. Makes sense in terms of engaging community and having their thoughts on it. Audrey?
Yeah, I think the community should be involved, but I think we have to be careful, again, with names. And it would be nice if we also have that infrastructure committee as well. And we should try to lay out the whole land so that we know what we're doing, such as maybe there can be themes, whether they're animals, whether they're cities or things we're well known for on here, you know. So it would be nice to see it with some kind of a name that means something. Not only just a person's name, because we don't even know who Harold was. So that's the type of thing. You have to go and find out the history of it, then you got to remember it and why it was named. So that's
that's a really good point, Audrey. I know at the end of the day too, it's like we have so many people doing amazing things, and everybody we want to recognize and honor. And it's really difficult when we're honing in on just one. So I know that's definitely is something we should definitely watch for. I'm wondering if maybe we can, I do like your suggestion too, if maybe we can give the suggestions on a survey type, like maybe choose one out of 4 or something with the task force and people, coming up with some suggestions. I think maybe that might be a way to kind of, because I do think your point of adding our cultural into this, our nations, we have that, things like that, as that there's already themes kind of already going, I think, in a sense. So maybe if, maybe we go in that direction. Is there any other feedback or input to this topic? Sherry Lynn?
It's Melba.
Okay,
yes,
sorry.
I agree that.
Sorry, Sherry.
I agree that we have to be.
Sorry, Melba, you have the floor.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. We have to be very careful. We have had great controversy in our community, and we still have strained relationships as a result of it. So I think we need to have a special meeting and discuss this in detail as to how we're going to move forward with it with community input. We have KO Lane, and KO, it's my understanding, it was named that way in the past as a result of her being the first person to, I guess, to be associated, being a really big part of special people. So I think we should have a special meeting because we should discuss special things concerning what road should be named in the future and involve community, how we're going to involve community. special meeting. Let's not let this one go by. As you mentioned before, you know, conflict of interest. We haven't resolved that. So let's solve some of these things that are very difficult, and community should be involved. And of course, the departments that are like today, that are connected to the concerns and what should be done. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Melba, for your input and feedback on this on this topic. I'm just wondering, in a sense of time frame for, like, I'm not sure if we have to necessarily call a full-on special council meeting. I think we should also be engaging our staff to help in building out the recommendations and suggestions, and because we all know we want community involved. It's a matter of how what that involvement looks like. Sherry Lynn?
Yeah, I was just gonna agree with that, and I just hope it's I still worry about the water tower. Remember the paint, the drawings, and I don't know if that guy, that young man, he got $500, and I think we're still waiting for his picture to be drawn on the water tower, or wherever, whatever happened with that. And I think go out to the community for sure. And it and like, I think like Audrey said, you know, we need a plan. Like, how many roads is there? How many names do we need? So we're not always going out there every time trying to find some names. Say if we have 5 roads, at least we have 5 names that the community have already agreed to. So this just isn't, we're not doing it often, you know. And to make it easier, I don't know, Miller Road, I don't know, Paulus Road, all these common last names. Just kidding. So yeah, take it out to the community.
Yeah, I think
Don't name it Paulus Road or whatever you do.
this is, yeah, and I agree. I think thank Nyama for everybody's input and feedback. There's been suggestions raised on this matter. If we can leave it with us, if everyone's agreeable, if there's no opposition, Kim Melba's suggesting to a special council meeting on this. I think we got to do a little bit of work in terms of the admin side to actually gauge that meeting and have deliverables and what that looks like. But I do agree, even with Sherry Lynn's comments on, you know, having a roster of names and a plan of how many roads are going to be forthcoming in the next 5, 10, 20 years, things like that. Because we know we have big infrastructure plans. We know we have a big gap. And so obviously there's going to be work to start to address those. So I do like that suggestion as well. So I guess, Lillian, to your point, we have a little bit of due diligence to do to give you, we don't have a straight up answer now. However, we'll have to engage community and then see what that looks like as well, as having a fuller discussion in terms of this. So I think we need a little bit of administration help to get us all the necessary information, and then to have a good informed discussion and then decision. And that, I think, can happen over the next, hopefully, looking to Tammy over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Not sure if that's quick enough, but I think, Leanne, we do need a little bit of time with this. I see Nathan has his hand raised.
Yeah, just a suggestion, because I'm also heard that kind of the immediate need in terms of deliveries and whatnot. Can't we just like go road 1 and 2 as a temporary measure, with the understanding that we're going to go full blown in terms of the community engagement afterwards?
That's a good suggestion. Lillian, is that doable or in the now?
Yeah, I mean, because there's only one, as of right now, there's only one entrance to Harold Road. And just to clarify for councillors for future reference, the names Harold Road and Dolores Road, as I put in the briefing note as well, were a condition of the sale of that property as a part of council purchasing that property from the original owners. So those names are carved in stone, that Harold Road and Dolores Road be that entrance off of Chiefswood Road in the future. But the other roads, again, weren't ever designated to be named, and the development as it exists now, or as it planned to have exist, is, I don't know that we're moving forward with the same plan that of course was kind of developed by Karen and Gail previously. But to put to Nathan's question and to Darren's suggestion in the chat as well, I mean, we could name the first intersecting road first road and second road. We just have to have some like sign postage there for delivery purposes.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that, Lilianne. So maybe if we can go with that just for now, as we do out, the rest of the work to this topic, and then we'll look to eventually have some type of contacts within community to get those roads named officially. Okay, I do appreciate this, Council. Thank you, Niall and Lilianne, for joining us on your vacation. Do apologize for that. I hope you have a good rest remaining of your time away.
Thank you, everybody.
No, have a great evening. Okay, Council. So we'll leave that on kind of a Darren. I'll check in with you on this matter to see how we can just connect the necessary information and build out that meeting. The next item is on the Six Nations natural gas. You'll see, and this is obviously no new news. We know about the federal carbon charge in terms of now what are we further going to do on the political level as part of their ask in the recommendation. So I'm wondering if maybe even Christopher, if I know this has been in part of some of the updates as well on the political side. So I'm wondering if you wanted to share any of your comments to this topic, and then we'll look to open the floor up further.
Sure. Thanks, Chief. Yeah, so you will all have seen, I know that Kerry's been on this, so he may have something to share on this as well. And I believe you will all have seen the memo from Tracy Sky at Six Nations Natural Gas about this. I think this issue is going to become a bigger issue with the passage of time for a number of reasons. First of all, I think everybody's aware that the implementation of the federal carbon tax, which obviously isn't officially called that, has been progressively introduced in the last couple of years and over the coming 7 years. So it was passed into law in 2018, started coming into effect in 2019, and then the rates basically increase all the way up to 2030. So what you will see now, and there will be a written report on this as well, but what you will see is that in Tracy's memo, the rate in 2019 was only 3.9 cents per cubic meter. That is now 12.39 cents. And that is going to more than double between now and 2030. So people now, for example, I'll bring up a sample bill that was sent around. Went that little bit. And on a bill with a total charge of $149, you have a federal carbon reduction plan charge of $18.58. That's with the current rate, which is 12.39 cents per cubic meter. So that will go up to potentially closer to $50 within the next few years. So this is going to keep going up. It's going to require some attention. There's also concerns being raised now about a new charge that might be levied in certain respects. Some people are nicknaming it the second carbon tax. So this is going to be an increasing issue in the future. Now, who has been active on this has submitted a letter to the federal government. This was an open letter back in January. I touched base with some of them as well today just to double check, but they have not received any formal response on that. And they are continuing to build out a plan of action on this. This is something that we're going to have to consider how we get involved with as well. First of all, in supporting COO's efforts, second of all, in exploring independent efforts as well. And I think that this is something that we can build into our advocacy on the excise tax as well, because this tax, the carbon tax that is, affects First Nations disproportionately. There is a carbon tax rebate that has been implemented elsewhere in the country. And of course, the way it's implemented differs province by province, but the rebate will not be benefiting as many people on First Nations territories as it will off, because it's contingent on filing on income tax filings. So if you don't file income taxes, you don't get that rebate. So there is a disproportionate impact there. There are also other ways where there are disproportionate impacts. For example, there can be industry-specific carve-outs and exemptions, but there have not been such exemptions applied to First Nations as First Nations. There are certain ways in which the impact of these taxes disproportionately impacts the communities up north because of the way their needs and their economic needs are structured. So there's a lot that needs to be done on this, and I think there's a number of avenues that we can take. One is supporting COO's approach, and I think that will require further discussion after this meeting. And second of all, certainly in our independent representations to the federal government, and potentially other means as well. So I don't know if Carrie has something to add, but this is going to be something that we're gonna have to do some more work on, both as Six Nations and as a constituent member of COO.
Thanks. Excuse me. Thank you, Christopher. I'm going to go to hands, questions, comments first, beginning with Carrie, over to Michelle, and then Helen.
Yeah, back in 18 or 19, Trudeau imposed a carbon charge on Canada. Provinces that had the carbon reduction plan were exempt. Ontario didn't have one. And this charge increases yearly, as Chris was mentioning, and it's in that briefing note that we got from Tracy. We told the government it was a tax. They said it wasn't a tax, and I'm pretty sure they changed the name to suit whatever's on our gas bill now. I think we should tell the government that as a sovereign nation, we have our own carbon reduction plan. We have solar farms that we invested in. We have the battery storage plant that is being built. We have our Carolinian forests that we are maintaining, i.e. The gypsy worm spraying, tree planting. There are trees out there that take in more carbon than other trees. So I think if we had a woodlot management plan, we could get the community involved, planting those trees. That Trees Unlimited presented something in the fall time, and they had that included in there. We could talk to the minister that has this portfolio, but I don't know what his name is. That's pretty well my spiel on that.
Okay, just one thing I would add is there has been some talk of a potential First Nations-based rebate. That's one of the things that COO has broached with the federal government, but there have been obviously no commitments on that, and so there still needs to be more work done to see if that can be accomplished. There's different potential policy solutions here, and different ways we can push for one of those solutions.
I think it's interesting, though, the last part, even Christopher Carey had mentioned in relation to even as a sovereign nation, saying, regardless of which the other provinces that did weren't really, I guess, impacted in a sense as much as Ontario has been. So I'm wondering, if that's maybe also some avenues to start to do a little bit more political work in that kind of lane. Michelle, and then over to Helen, and then Hazel.
Okay, so I'm thinking that we should be using some of the COVID dollars like we did through COVID to offset the costs of the gas bills until we can put a plan in place to advocate. I mean, it is kind of last minute, but there's something we can do to provide relief for all our community members. And if we're going to do this for gas, as I said before, we also needed to do it for people who are using propane as well, because gas isn't the only means of heating homes. So I don't know how much we actually allocated from the COVID funds, but Darren, did you say we had 3 million left? If we could allocate some of that to all residents, sorry, over the summer?
Yeah, it's just a bit over 3. I think it was approximately 300 that we have allocated as a credit off gas bills, natural gas bills only, 2 winters ago. We didn't do it last winter, so I think that's a good suggestion. We can look at that.
And so with that, like I only pulled up the the financial report from the natural gas from last year. So do they run a deficit every year? I mean, it's our company, right? So are we running a deficit every year?
It would vary. Like I think in the earlier years, it was more of, balancing out, but with these impacts of legislation, that's where it's even further building that deficit.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Yeah. Helen? Oh, sorry, Helen, you're on mute.
Prior to COVID, who had a carbon pricing pollution something committee? Big long name. Because I sat there and it was trying to work to have the carbon tax not apply on reserve. I don't know why Cool waited so long. I don't know why something wasn't done when they first started talking about doing this years. Nobody seemed to fight against it. Now that it's here, they all want to fight against it. So we met a few times before COVID. Nothing really came of it, I don't think, because Rosie was having a hard time getting appointments with the Minister of Finance. And then when COVID hit, we kind of quit meeting. I know we had one meeting after COVID, but it was quite a while ago, so I'm not really clear on what it was, but there hasn't been a whole lot of action there. So I don't know, I could probably write to the lady that sends out the emails and ask her what's going on with this. Are they still doing it? Are we going to still do it? Are we still going to meet? Are we still going to talk about this? Just to see what's happening. I don't know. And as far as because it's on the gas too, your car, the gas too. It's not just on fuel.
Excise tax.
I mean, gas is fuel, but I mean, when you buy a liter, when you buy gas at the gas station, it's on every liter of gas. And as for the gas company, when I used to sit on the gas board, it was never in a deficit. They always kind of had made money. They didn't have much of a surplus, but they always made money. So I don't know what's going on now that what's his face is gone. What was his name? The gas man?
Nick.
Yeah. Now that he's gone, I don't know if, to be honest, if the gas is doing that great. But anyway, I can find out more about this committee if you want to see if they're doing anything or going to be doing anything. At least find out what's going on there.
Yeah, that works. And then also Christopher, we'll continue to do that check-in as well on the federal side.
Yeah, and there's a bit more that I can perhaps share off the record too.
Yeah, and I think this is where we gotta, in a sense, Council, you got this one issue that's now interconnected to multiple other avenues politically, right? So I think that's where we got to come up with that bigger plan of what does it like, because to Helen's point of, it's not just impacting residents with natural gas. We got gas stations here. We got, to Michelle's point, other heating sources. We then now have excise taxes that is all intertwined with the Minister of Finance. We know we've been ongoing discussions with Freeland. So that's where I think for me, we got to come up with that the bigger strategy across the board politically. That will then help entertain the rest. Hazel, and then over to Sherry Lynn, and I'll get back to, I see Michelle's comment in the chat of making the motion. Hazel, you have the floor.
Yes, I just wanted to say that in the previous council, I know we had established a tax exemption committee to work on getting all the taxes removed that were, that the Six Nations people have to pay. One of them was that carbon, the other was excise, And even that, not the provincial, but the GS, the other tax anyway, that makes up that 13%. We had a committee, and I know Helen and I both sat on there, and we were in a process of trying to get the minister to come to council so we could talk face to face with them about having to pay any of those types of taxes, because we all know that the Indian Act addresses taxes. That's why we do not pay the land taxes and all of that. So I think what people have done, they've dissected that 3 little letter word into a million pieces to get any kind of extra money. When the Indian Act just specifies tax. So maybe that committee should be reestablished to get their heads together and come up with ideas and get the minister here to meet with full council. Maybe we can make better headway that way with removing these taxes that really shouldn't be here. Thanks.
Thank you for your input and feedback, Hazel, on that. And we could definitely still have that conversation, because again, I think the bigger, like you say, political issue, and I think it's important, you know, at this point in time, especially with these bigger issues around excise tax and everything else, that full council, I think full council needs to be, you know, invited, or rather a part of that bigger discussion. So I'm not sure if it'll be even worth necessarily going to, like, say, a 3-member, 4-member committee, when I think everybody needs to be involved in this one.
Yes, that's right.
Sherry Lynn, and then over to Christopher.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, when I was watching that, I don't know, when they're in the chambers or whatever, and the government or what, I was watching that on TV. Not that I sit there and watch it all the time, but they were complaining, I think it was last month, they were just on the Liberals about this carbon tax too. The Conservatives and the NDPs, and they got pretty tore up, but they still stuck to their guns. So I think that no matter what's happening, it's going to be here, just like the first carbon tax. So I guess my question would be, if whoever we meet, I think we need to figure out what is Six Nations stance in all this, and how do we feel, like, you know what I mean? And tell the government, or tell COO, or tell whatever, this is where we stand, and for the gas and for the gasoline, those kinds of things. So I guess that's what I would like to know, is what's our stance first as this council before we go meet anybody.
Yeah, agreed, Sherry Lynn. And that's exactly part of the, really, I would say the next step is for us to kind of get all the updates across the board, come back, have that meeting specifically on this topic, then be able to then really build out that position, Sherry Lynn. But in the meantime, I think that we should still start to queue in. You know, as we know, it takes some time to get into, you know, different ministers' doors and so forth. But the other piece I think you hit is important as well, is the opposition. You know, Christopher, we've done this in the past, as well as we know we've met with the leader of the Conservative Pierre. It was obviously, I think, at times controversial, like, not that we're supporting any party for that matter, but rather need to look politically on strategizing how we could utilize opposition to some of these issues. And I think that's an important one as well, Sherry Lynn, that we can further build out upon the political plan once we have the position here in community. So definitely need time. Agreed. And a timeline rather. So that's something I think, Christopher, we can help build out over the next, even say 3 months, the timeline to say by month 3, we should be here. Christopher?
Thanks, Chief. Yeah, I just wanted to add a little more clarity. So you will probably see, so there's 2 separate things that we're talking about here. One is the result of the 2018 Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act. The result of that was the federal carbon pricing system, and that is known as the carbon tax. And so that's got the escalator in the rates that goes from 2019 to 2030. And so that has just gone up for this year as well. So that's sort of the main increase. The other increase is what has been referred to in the media as the quote second carbon tax, and this might have been the cause of some of the stuff that Sherry Lynn was referring to that has been in the news lately, certainly with the opposition parties. That's a result of the government's recent clean fuel regulation, which were reported on by the Parliamentary Budget Officer. The Parliamentary Budget Officer is a neutral officer of Parliament who did a report on this, on the impact per household. And the impact per household ranges between $231 per household to over $1,000 per household, depending on province and income level. So that's another increasing potential carbon tax related impact. So there's sort of multiple things here, but as the chief is indicating, there's multiple ways that we can try to approach this and try to find solutions to the government with. And yeah, and just one other thing, what Carrie was mentioning about, there's a bunch of things that we've done here at Six Nations that that count towards lowering emissions that are part of our sort of historical efforts.
Yeah, and I agree, Christopher. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, but the other point I wanted to raise was, I think in terms of the engagement and further, to Sherry Lynn's point of, creating this timeline of what all we need to do to gather all the necessary pertinent information to then develop our position on this. I know there's, again, multiple slight differences, but ultimately the bigger picture politically, I think, is what we need to get the handle on. And one of those is I would like to call even a meeting with all our gas retailers so that we can get a clear picture from a business perspective on the impacts of this as a gas retailer. I know I had conversations already in the past as well with a few of them, and they just some of even the challenges that they have when dealing with the Ministry of Finance and so forth. I think that's also as part of the bigger picture that we need to kind of get a handle on in order to further have that well thought out position to then relay on to all parties and so forth. Helen?
Yeah, I remember when the previous council, I think we had a lot of the gas people come in talking about it, because they were all concerned about it too, because it raises, they have to charge it, they have to pay it. And that's, I think, in a lot of cases when they're raising up the gas, I think they did it this week, 4 cents or something. That's why they're raising the gas up. It's that carbon thing that raising the gas prices. So it wouldn't hurt to and meet with them all again. I would always love to be, and I've tried before, all of these gas people tell us how much gas they sell in a week and determine from there how much carbon tax people are paying. I never get the gas companies to agree to something like that because, they don't want to share whatever, but if you count them, we have like 16, 17 gas stations here. It doesn't seem like it, but if you count them, we do.
Yeah.
And so we're paying a lot of money in carbon tax to the government that we don't get to share. We don't get any of it. It's not benefiting us as a community. It's going into someone else's pocket, I guess the government's pocket. They're probably giving it to somebody else to do something, but we don't benefit nothing from it in our community. And we've got more gas stations in Brantford.
Right.
Yet we're not benefiting from it. We should be benefiting from that carbon tax. We're going to have to pay it. This is just the retail, not the gas company, but the retail. So it would be nice if we get that information to say this is how much we're paying on a weekly basis. But come to our gas stations. It's still, if it's non-natives, they're still buying gas at our gas stations. So our gas stations, they're still contributing all of this money. And I'll bet you any money it's millions on a weekly basis. So that's just something I often thought of trying to do. But I did ask a few gas companies or gas stations at one time, but I didn't get a good reception.
So maybe what we'll do, Helen, just to your point, because I know this is all part of the bigger plan, and there's a lot of moving parts to this. I know you're going to go back and get an update on your committee. We'll do what we updates on the federal level, but I think what we'll also do is we have that, if you recall, during COVID when we were meeting with the businesses. So we do have, I believe, a most up-to-date recent list of gas station contacts. And maybe what we can do is start from there and to send this invitation out as a full council meeting with all the retailers as part of building out the position paper, because I think actually it's even a little more than that. I think right now we're sitting at roughly 27 gas stations total. So we know that they're here, and I agree, it's the dollars that they're paying that this community gets nothing of. So there's a lot of moving parts. So maybe if I can, I know Michelle had moved on the motion, I believe, in the chat. Obviously, this motion is to read from further political advocacy. So I think, Christopher, that's where we need to actionize this motion. So if we can, Brooke, to our earlier conversations some time ago, this would be an action political item that we would need over to the office quite quickly. And then, Christopher, we have to report back on that plan, like building out the timelines. That includes meeting with the gas retailers, all necessary information across the board with the gas company, but I think also the bigger picture, because we still have the excise tax. So we know the biggest is Grand River Enterprises, which we already know work is ongoing. So I think we need a little bit of time to put this all together and then come up with that timeline and further positions. Nathan?
Yeah, great discussion, and just wanted to add to the position piece as we develop that out, and I think it was Helen that brought it up. We have the majority of the gas stations in Ontario, and I think we probably outnumber all of the First Nations put together.
Exactly.
So I would be cautious of how we position ourselves with Chiefs of Ontario, understanding that they go down the routes of formulas, and as you all know, we all lose out on those formulas. And I just don't want to be at the end of the day in a position when we're bound by a coup kind of process that we're collecting most of the data and have most of the stations, and our stations lose out at the end of the day. So just kind of wanted to flag that as we develop our positions. I don't want to be greedy, but at the same time, I want our gas stations as well as our citizens to actually benefit from something at the end of the day at a coup process.
Really good points. Totally agree, Nathan. I think that's something that we definitely need to consider. As we all know, those damn formulas never work to us. Are there any further questions or comments? So I just want to go back up. Sorry, Helen.
While we're at it, fighting for the carbon tax, we might as well fight for the federal gas tax too.
Exactly.
Years ago, when I first got on council, that's when the federal gas tax was a big thing, and that's on every liter of gas as well. They had designated the AFN. The government was going to give money for the federal gas tax to municipalities and First Nations. First Nations was going to get a whole load of money from the federal gas tax, and they had assigned it to the AFN. And I think that Earl Commanda, I think his name is, he was supposed to be looking after it, and he wasn't doing anything. And I kept calling him and saying, "What are you doing about the federal gas tax? What are you doing about it? That's money sitting there that we could be using." And he never did anything about it. And then finally the government took it back and turned it into what we know today as the infrastructure fund. They took First Nations part and lumped it back together and give it a different name. And I think that's what the infrastructure fund is today. But we had our own. And we could try and do the same thing with the carbon tax. We could try to do it so that First Nations have their own bundle of money for the carbon tax, just like they did with the federal tax. I was so mad at that man that time because he didn't do nothing and they took it away. So that's another thing we can fight for is we can still fight for the federal gas tax because we don't.
Sorry, Helen, you're on mute. If you had any last comment.
Oh my God, all that I said was on mute?
No, just your last comment. We heard you. It was just your last little bit comment.
Oh, I can't even remember what I said now.
Either way, at the end of the day, I agree with what you're
Anyway,
saying.
I don't know what I was saying.
I think we pull in all what you're talking about is the interconnecting of issues, the federal now level to what's happening on the carbon side. Like it's all interconnected. So I'll look to if I can back to Michelle. Want to check in. Are you still on the mover for this motion? Again, this is to further on the political advocacy.
I can do the political advocacy plus do a motion to pay the cost of the gas. I mean, I guess gas, propane bills up to an amount of like, I don't know, you guys need to tell me that. Carrie, do you know your financials from the natural gas company?
I'm wondering, Michelle, if we can maybe just deal with the first one right now, and then we can work with the finance to really pull out, because I know finance gave a breakdown of the surplus of COVID dollars. I think what Darren referred to earlier, that roughly just over $3 million. So maybe if we can bring that back, and then we'll have finance be a part of it so that we can tie this in at that point in time. If that's okay with you, if I could just look to the political advocacy piece motion right now. And then we'll look to then the second part, which is the financial part of offsetting the gas bills.
Yeah, I can do the political part, but this has already been asked at a council meeting, so I'm assuming Darren and the team already have that amount as well.
Okay, well, I just want to make sure, because I want to make sure amounts are good and everything's cross-checked. So if everybody has that at this point, I don't see a problem with that. I just want to make sure financials are, that we got the right numbers. Okay, so the mover for Michelle, I'm going to deal with the first one, and then we'll go back to the discussion on the gas bills. So let's move by Michelle on the political advocacy, the motion on the natural gas. Is there a seconder?
I'll second that.
Second by Carrie. Further questions or comments? All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing or hearing none, motion is carried. Okay, I want to go back to Michelle's other motion, or rather suggestion, in terms of the offsetting the gas bills with the COVID dollars. Darren, can we just confirm, do we know what that number is, or Carrie?
Was approximately, I'm almost positive it was 300 per bill as a credit. But my suggestion is we'll confirm that, and we may want to look at indexing that based on the increase in the carbon tax charge. And bring back a figure as a recommendation to council at general finance early in June. That's my recommendation, Chief.
That's what I'm getting to as well. And I obviously want to highlight still Michelle's concern on timeline to this. So we can get that back. Plus her, that's a good point. Thanks, Sherilyn. I know Michelle brought this up as well, the propane. So we will, if we do one, we're going to do all type of thing in terms of assistance. Helen?
So instead of helping people with the whole gas bill, wouldn't it be better just to pay the carbon tax for, say, 6 months or something?
Well, I think that's where we're going to get into discussion around what's the best financial position to best assist. So I think we got to do a little bit of due diligence on exactly what you're saying, to Michelle's point, and have our finance team kind of build this out. So Darren, if maybe you can give further direction to the finance team on exactly what we're looking for to then make a good informed decision at our next general finance.
Ask Chief, I can do that. My question is on the propane question. I don't know how much data we have on that, but I'll reach out to Tracy and others to see what we can find on that.
Okay, yes, please, thank you. Nathan. Oh. I think Nathan just had his hand up. Okay, so does that suffice, Michelle, on that piece? So once we get that, we'll deal with it as soon as general finance.
Can I ask that Darren, you said next general finance?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Michelle. Okay, I'm going to continue moving along, council, here on our agenda. The next item, I didn't receive, looking for the meetings attended on council reports. I know there's been a few, but we'll look to submit those in. The next one is from the updates of the Office of the CEO. So this is Holly Smith has an update in relations to the First Nations perspectives on emergency management within Ontario. So good evening, Holly. I'll pass the floor over to yourself for this update now.
Yeah, Chief. Thanks, everyone. So this is a meeting that I attended on April the 27th, and it was Indigenous Service Canada Multilateral Emergency Management Service Agreement Table. And it was chaired by Gina Wilson. She's the Deputy Minister of Indigenous Affairs, and there was representatives from emergency management there as well. And essentially the purpose of the meeting was to convene a multilateral table with Ontario First Nations leadership, the province of Ontario, and Indigenous Services Canada. And they're looking to discuss First Nations perspectives on emergency management in Ontario to create a new multilateral emergency management service agreement. So I did develop a report for this meeting with some updates and overview on what was discussed. And essentially, the federal and the provincial governments are looking at developing an agreement with First Nations in Ontario. I did pass this along to Ashley Russell Taylor as well as Maya Bovin to comment on that as well. And essentially, we're looking at how we can proceed, how Six Nations can proceed with engaging in a multilateral service agreement with the provincial and federal governments. So that report has been shared with council as well as some of the additional attachments that they had suggested. But essentially, I was there as an observer just to collect that information, to provide that update to council. And I see that Nathan has his hand up.
Now, Holly, Nathan.
Yeah, just clarification. Is this multilateral agreement a single agreement with communities, or are they do they want to create an agreement with all communities in Ontario at a table?
It sounds like it's the latter, Nathan, that they want to create an agreement with multiple communities.
Oh my God.
And essentially, it's so essentially the federal and provincial governments have emergency management plans. Yeah. And I'm sure that you know this, Nathan, as well. First Nations communities falls outside of that jurisdiction. And so there's just a lot of issues with emergency planning and response and resources to support emergency management. And essentially this, I guess, agreement or this table is looking at bringing First Nations to the table. But in terms of the steps forward, I'm looking to council to, I guess, understand how we proceed and how we move forward with that.
Just a follow-up, Chief.
Sorry, go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah, I think the obvious is kind of the piece we should go is kind of look to carve out a separate table for Six Nations. My fear is the North-South issues are going to dominate this particular table, and you know, the resources, as you know, we don't want to be sitting there fighting with the NAN community with who has, you know, an evacuation going. I understand we're helping with some of those evacuations as it stands right now. And I just see they're creating a greater kind of problem than they actually have to as it relates to this. But I think at the end of the day, we have to protect our emergency management, and because ours is quite different than, you know, the NAN communities would be undertaking. And kind of look to isolate. And maybe this is something too from an emergency management standpoint that, you know, we work with our brothers and sisters at the Iroquois Caucus on, create a Southern kind of approach to this. But I am gravely concerned that we're going to be left on the sidelines of this table with having to being the grown up in the room and left with no resources at the end of the day. It's my fear.
I totally agree. Thanks, Nathan, for that. And you took it right. I think this is a caucus discussion as well. And as much as we can, yes, to your earlier point, Nate, we've been helping a lot our other communities and evacuees and so forth. And as much as we can, when we can, obviously want to always still continue that. But I do agree is in terms of our position, we definitely need something specifically to Six Nations. And I think further to that, like I say, on the upcoming even Iroquois caucus, now this agenda is really further building out. That helps even furthering the backing of the power that the caucus can have when dealing with at these types of tables, especially when it comes to funding, because we know we all know North, especially under this topic, is going to be forefront and center. Helen?
So I guess my question is this all leading up to transfer? I would think it's all leading up to transfer because I know they're transferred in emergency management. My other question is, what role is the AFN playing in here? Because if you remember, the AFN has all of the emergency management funding. So I'm curious as to what they have to do with this. Because Nathan, if you remember, we had found out that they had all that emergency management funding. I think it was, I forget how many millions it was. So there's something going on. And I agree that Six Nations needs to look after Six Nations.
Most definitely, I agree as well. Sorry, Nate, just do you have further comment on that, on Helen's last? Oh, $2.3 million. So yes, they're still within the AFN. Thank you for that, Nathan. Audrey?
Yeah, I agree with what we're saying. Six Nations has to speak for themselves on this one and many more. This is so important, but I think it has to begin with us working with our emergency management group and debrief with them what it is that we need. What is our position? What are all the resources we're lacking? What more fire vehicles do we need? Trucks, etc. And we have to know what we're going in for so that we're making a model. We create a Six Nations model. And that's what we take to any table that we go to, because if not, then we're, as Nate said, we're going to be left out in the cold. Yeah.
Definitely a good point as well. Thank you for that, Audrey. Nathan.
Just final point on this too, and I think this goes back to the resource and back to Helen's point about the transfer piece. One of the areas of concern I've always had with the kind of emergency and fire services is ISCA's always separated the two, and I get why from that standpoint, and from and now understanding fire and emergency services a little bit better. But it makes more sense for us to combine it from a Six Nations perspective, to have both of those two kind of working hand in hand. It doesn't matter for other First Nations, but for us, it really makes sense. So that's another unique kind of position that we would put forward. The other piece that I'm concerned about is in all of these situations, Six Nations does the training for other First Nations on emergency management, and we don't get the money from ISC from that. That money is getting funneled to AFN. And that's a big problem for me. That 2.3 million, some of that should be coming back to Six Nations Fire Department and Six Nations coffers to offset our fire costs, because we're doing all of the training for First Nations, other First Nations coming down using our academy, and we get nothing for that. So I think that's something else to kind of tack on as we look at this strategy is, getting reimbursed for the good work that we're already doing in emergency management for other First Nations.
Thanks, Nate, for that. That's extremely important as well. I know that that's when, even with the academy itself, obviously that was, Bill can help with this, but obviously still be a part of a little bit of, revenue generation as well. So I definitely I hear you on that point, Nathan, to get that those dollars rightfully back. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Is there any further questions or comments for Holly? So Holly, maybe what we can do from here is to help. Again, we have a little bit of further due diligence to do to further, get the necessary information. But I think, again, to build out yet another position, I think this all goes back to, like you're saying, Helen, is overall transfer and what that means. So I think that's where, we have to be very, very cautious in terms of, the fine language within some of these agreements and so forth, because that's where it's really gonna matter. Audrey?
Yeah, just another thing to add, and it refers to Dr. Don Martin Hill's presentation, that we have to plan for the future. If she now, in all her research that she's done, shows us that there are going to be major floods coming. And so we have to build for that. We have to make sure that we anticipate all these natural disasters that are going to happen and try to mitigate them years and years before they start, especially with this warming weather and loss of species and all the rest of it. So it's a great, big, huge plan for the whole reserve and probably the territories around us as well.
That's you bring another really important element to this discussion. It's like you say, the future, especially under emergency management, because that's going to take up a lot more cost. If what we're saying with climate is going to be happening in this region and area. So yes, I think it's another really, really strategic point. Okay, Holly, I do appreciate you attending this technical table and bringing back. Again, I'm glad we always like to maintain our position at this point as observer status only, so that's not misconstrued, as with consultation and so forth. So, Holly, what we'll do now is we'll kind of work with Christopher on the political side of things and team to further our next steps on this at this table.
Great, thank you.
And now for that, Holly, Audrey?
Just a quick question for Holly. In the minutes, does it say that you're there as an observer?
Not in the minutes, not in the report that I shared. These are the official minutes for that meeting. This is just the report that I prepared for council for the update.
It could be in both of them. What about the official minutes? Are you listed as an observer?
I'm not sure. I don't have a copy of the official minutes for that.
So will you check, and if you're not, then would you please make sure that it's in?
Sure.
They'll say you were there on our behalf.
Yeah, and that usually definitely reads within the record, so it's always nice to double check. Thanks for that.
Sure.
Okay, so moving on then, rather, council, I'm going to continue along with our agenda here. Okay, so the next one then is scheduling. So we'll do, again, just on that last topic, we'll touch base with Holly again and further this item and bring it back to council, because there's obviously a little bit more due diligence. But moving into scheduling, this one is under 11.1. We are looking for a delegate. This is for the Brantford and Area Sports Hall of Recognition induction ceremony. Again, honoring the 2023 inductees and honorees, taking place on June 14th at 6:30 in Brantford. Is there, Audrey?
Yeah, I'll volunteer for that because I usually go every year.
Okay.
Father Ross and Gaylor are always part of this as well.
Okay, well, do appreciate you putting your name forward, Audrey, to attend this. Is there a mover and seconder to that effect? Again, this is just in Brantford. Moved by Hazel, second by Greg. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing or hearing the motion is carried. The next one, this one is to appoint a delegate to attend the Dr. Anne Marie Vaughan, the presidential installation on Friday, June 2nd. This is at the North Etobicoke campus, looking to see if there's any interest or availability for a delegate to attend that. And I believe this should be within your Dropbox for further details or information on each of these events. Is anyone interested or available? And again, it's not like we always have to send a delegate. We're just bringing this forward as they come in. So if nobody's available, it's not like it's a big deal. Just need to know.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, Michelle.
Did you say Anne Marie's bio's in our drop down? I mean, in our chat box?
I don't know about the bio. I just think it was more, I believe, the event information. It might be just that.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, is there any looking to see any interest or availability? And if not, we can kindly send our regrets. Okay, I'm not seeing or hearing anything, so I'll look to Tammy to kindly send regrets for this event. Now, moving on to the next event, this is to appoint delegations. As we know, the annual Chiefs Assembly for the Chiefs of Ontario. That is happening June 13th and 5th through to the 15th. It's happening in Thunder Bay. I am expected to attend and looking to a counselor or counselors to come with me. There's also, as you see, a Zoom option as well. So if you don't want to travel to Thunder Bay, there's still a Zoom option. So I do plan on traveling to Thunder Bay for that. Looking to see if anyone's available to or interested in joining. Audrey?
I'm interested in the Zoom, but not traveling.
Okay. Is there anybody interested in the traveling? Helen?
I'll go with you.
Okay, perfect. Looking to motion
What's the
for
date to get?
June 13th, 14th, and 15th. So travel day, June 12th.
All right.
Okay, I'll look to a motion to have Helen join in person as well as Audrey via Zoom. Is there a mover and seconder to that?
I'll move, Sherilyn.
Moved by Sherilyn, seconded by Nathan. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing or hearing none, motion is carried. The next item, event, we have been invited to. This is in relation to the Hamilton Children's Water Festival, which again is an annual event aimed at educating youth in Hamilton on water. This is happening on June 1st between 9 and 10 a.m. at Pier 4 Park, which is in Hamilton. Looking to see if there's any interest or availability for anyone to attend this on June the 1st. And again, if not, can kindly send regrets. Okay, I'm not seeing or hearing anybody that's available or interested in this event, so we will kindly send our regrets for this. The next and final item I have under scheduling is from our anti-bullying task force, which I know we still have, we got to get that changed, but the name change, but this is to attend a community education series, which is happening. I think this is really something that could be for everybody. I think that we just put this as a FYI type of thing. If you're interested in around, it's happening in communities. So if you want to just have this in your calendars for the upcoming event and series, I think that might be something that we can maybe all just, if we're available to go to. Helen?
Yeah, the National Conference on the Enforcement of First Nations Laws.
Right.
I had sent an email to council. I thought it was very important that we attend this session.
Yes.
Because right now we're in the middle of trying to do something about all our environmental laws and our residency and our community standards. So I think it would be very important for people to attend this, to just to hear what's going on and how people are doing it and everything. I know it's got something to do with the First Nations agreement, First Nations enforcement. I mean, First Nations, I don't know what it's called.
Yeah.
Land stuff, but I think it would be interesting to listen to and gain information on it.
I totally agree, and in fact, this was on the list, my list as well, to be added for the scheduling part. So, do apologize on that, Nathan.
Yeah, I agree with Helen. Just understanding that you have to be a land management act to access the tools that they'll be talking about, which we're not.
Right. So I'm wondering though, this in the sense of, like more of information on the other pieces as well, because there is, I think we still have some work, really important work through our Justice Department. So I'm wondering if maybe even, Tim and crew and others or whoever see fit on the technical side should also maybe kind of have some type of observer participation.
Them and Lonnie and Phil.
Agreed.
And keep in mind, at the beginning of the term, Lonnie and Phil went to Wiki, Nipissing, and Rama to check out those communities because they're under Land Management Act, right? To hear from them.
Right.
So it might be good just to forward that report again out to council.
Do appreciate that. Thanks. Thanks for that, Nathan. Is there any further questions or comments or input to the event, the last event, looking to delegate to attend? I think again, though, we'll work with our admins team and staff and get a roster of attendees through that. So is any political interested?
Well, I would like to go if nobody else wants to go. But
Helen?
if anybody else wants to go, please do.
Okay, thank you for that, Helen. Michelle?
So I just have a question. So it's a panel of us councillors, correct? Is that what I'm understanding, to see the political views and voices? And I just think it's a really bad weekend because all Ontarios will be everywhere in the park that day. And I just, it's the weekend before everybody goes back to school. So I don't know that the uptake from community would be, it would be nice to do it on a evening, I would think.
Yeah, I think we're definitely gonna be having some conflicts, that's for sure. Tammy, can you just confirm the that date again?
And I'll go if the date changes. Just I'm scorekeeping at
So
the
the law,
volunteer.
are you talking about the law enforcement meeting? That one is happening on June 5th, the same day that we have confirmed for the housing policy review. And so there is actually a couple of things that have come up on June 5th, and that's one meeting, but there's also a Chiefs of Ontario Premier and Ministers meeting. And that's majority of the afternoon. So I don't know whether council wants to move the housing policy review meeting based on whether people are going to be wanting to attend that.
Yeah, see, that's okay. That's now I'm getting back to the challenge we had because we've put off the housing policy a couple times now. I think it was important that we still move forward with that meeting. So maybe what we'll do in terms of the staffing side, still allow, I know Helen has an interest on the June 5th meeting, but we'll still move forward on the policy meeting itself, because I think those have to be really, addressed, because we were still seeing those issues come through. Sherry Lynn and then Audrey.
Where was it? Sorry, I missed that.
Confirm location, Tammy?
Quebec.
Quebec.
That's the Hilton LeMay or whatever it's called.
Lac LeMay.
Yeah.
So it's the 5th and 6th, because I seen Nathan's in the
Well,
chat.
travel day, obviously just the 5th, right? So that would be impacted on that day.
Yeah.
So the 6th, it would be the meeting of Sherilyn.
Yeah, I can go to that. If anybody else doesn't want to go.
Okay, so do you want to then, Helen, let's get a motion for Helen and Sherilyn to attend that meeting. And Lac LeMay is our mover and seconder, moved by Audrey, seconder. Second by Hazel, all in favor?
I got a question, Mike.
Oh, question, Audrey?
Can you also join on Zoom?
I don't know. I haven't read it to see if it does say that.
I didn't see a Zoom option, but we can find out, Audrey.
Okay, thank you. If it is, I would be interested.
Okay, in the meantime, though, we'll also still have to move forward. Don't forget with our housing policy meeting, because I know there's still that happening too. So unless we move it to, again, change the date on that part, because there's to Tammy's point, we have 3 meetings happening that day. So we already lose 2 counselors because they're going to go to Quebec. So just a little FYI, council.
think it's important to keep going, you guys, for whoever's here.
I think so too. So we're going to continue moving on. That meeting's still in play at this point in time. Anything changes, we'll email out.
So I got a comment.
Sure, Sherilyn.
So that one that Tammy was talking about, I got Coup Health at 12 with Doug Ford in them. Is that what she's talking about?
Sorry, Tammy, can you just confirm that piece?
There's a now all afternoon on the 5th, the Chiefs of Ontario have organized a meeting with Ford as well as several ministers.
Yeah.
And it's running
Okay.
right from, I think, early, right after lunch until later in the afternoon.
Okay, because that's what it is. That's 12 till whatever I have here. Okay, I just wanted to make sure someone's going. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sherilyn.
So
Okay,
are you attending the minister with the ministers, Mark?
Yes. All in favor on the previous motion? Any opposed? Seeing or hearing none, motion is carried. Okay, so we got a few things happening here, council, on that day. So we'll look to what we all bring back. Is there any further questions or comments? I'll need a motion to second reading waived on all the previous travel motions. Moved by Helen, seconder. Second by Audrey to waive second reading. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing or hearing on motion is carried. Okay, council, that's all we have for the open session. However, we do have a decent in camera. Audrey?
Yeah, just a quick question. Can we get all these meetings on the calendar like we used to do, please?
So yes, and you do have access to the calendar, Audrey, which to my understanding, they do get uploaded. So I'm not sure which calendar you're referring to. Do you want that to send out on a weekly basis or a monthly basis? Because if your phone or your iPad, it should be within the main calendar.
Mine doesn't show up there.
Okay, well, we'll get that worked out.
Thank you.
Thanks, Audrey. Okay, all in favor to adjourn the open session? Moved by Audrey, seconded by Greg to adjourn. Motion, all in favor? Any opposed? Seeing or hearing none, motion is carried. Okay, council,